This is Broseley, just a couple of miles from the Ironbridge Gorge and the River Severn in Shropshire. Today, about 5,000 people live in this attractive town. It has its own special atmosphere. And, in an age of out-of-town shopping centres, it has managed to retain real local amenities, which gives the town a unique identity. The character of Broseley and its people took shape during the 18th and 19th century, when the town played an important part in the British Industrial Revolution. Coal put Broseley on the industrial map. Coal to fire the furnaces to make iron, bricks, tiles and pottery. This wall of old saggers in which pottery was once fired is a reminder of those days. One of the justifications for building the now famous Ironbridge was to provide a connection between the coal pits and industries of Broseley and the industries north of the River Severn. John Wilkinson, nicknamed Iron Mad, who was closely involved with the erection of the Ironbridge, lived at the Lawns, Broseley, and ran the nationally important ironworks just outside the town at Willey. On a different scale, but just as vital to the local economy in this revolutionary period, was the clay tobacco pipe industry. Pipes were first made in and around Broseley in the early 1600s, and between 1680 and 1730 there were more than 50 families making pipes. Over 100 years later, manufacture was concentrated in larger works run by fewer firms, and during the 1850s and 60s, the Southern family had a monopoly of pipe production. The brothers, Edwin and William, ran rival factories at the New Inn and Leggs Hill, both only a few yards away from here. The only other major Victorian manufacturer to challenge the Southerns was Rowland Smitherman, who set up the Crown Pipeworks in these buildings in 1881. Smitherman produced a wide range of pipes, most almost identical to those made by the Southerns, and manufacture continued in these works until the First World War. Then sometime in the 1930s, Harry Southern took over the factory and ran it until his death in 1957. In the Ironbridge Gorge Museum's library, local collector Rex Key takes up the story.
Of the vast range of different pipes that both the Southerns and Smithermans produced, undoubtedly the most famous was the churchwarden. Pipes like these, with very long stems, were known variously as alderman, long straws and long Dutch straws. The Roden family started to make these in the 18th century, and they soon became very popular in the coffee houses and clubs of Regency London. William Southern and Co. continued to make churchwardens and long straws, and was eventually the last firm in the country to do so.
Today, the skill of making long-stemmed pipes is no longer practiced, but fortunately we can still see churchwardens being made. In 1938, Mr. Gornall of Shrewsbury took the trouble to bring his cine camera to the works where Clara Bagley was one of the last people in the country making long-stemmed pipes. The film is a remarkable survival. It was originally a silent film, but we have added a new commentary to explain what's going on. The film starts by showing a selection of pipes obviously made by William Southern and Company for exhibition purposes. The coiled pipe in the centre, surrounded by other elaborate pipes, is in stark contrast to the ordinary cutties and the long-stemmed churchwardens below. Next, we're introduced to the Pipeworks on King Street, Broseley, operated by Harry Southern between the 1930s and 1957. Through the entrance, we can just glimpse the bottle kiln before the camera turns to the piles of Devon clay in the corner of the yard, waiting to be passed through the pug mill. Once extruded from the mill, the clay was cut into blocks, one of which is shown here, waiting to be taken up to the moulding benches. Now we see Clara Bagley preparing her board for the first stage of making a long-stemmed churchwarden pipe. From the block at her side, she takes 2 handfuls of clay, carefully kneading them into exactly the right consistency. The clay is then rolled out on the board 2 at a time. You can see how quickly the pipes take shape. At this stage, the pipes were called dummies. Once the clay has been rolled to the right length by hand, Clara takes another board and rolls it over the dummies to give the stems a consistent thickness. The technique of making pipes in this way had not changed for over 200 years, and so the procedures Mr. Gornall filmed in 1938 would have been familiar to any 18th century pipe maker. The 2-piece cast iron mould is then oiled so that when Clara puts the dummy into it, the clay will not stick to the sides. She then carefully threads a wire up the stem of the dummy until it is just short of the bowl. As you can appreciate, this was a very delicate and skilled operation. Once the wire is in the stem, the dummy is positioned in the mould. Then we see the metal stopper at the end of a lever being pressed down to hollow out the bowl of the pipe. Surplus clay is removed from the top of the bowl with a palette knife before Clara opens the mould to reveal the pressed pipe. The wire is pushed through to the bowl, then removed, and the limp pipe is carefully put on one side. The operation begins again, and the wire is threaded up another dummy. Down comes the stopper to hollow out the bowl, and another pressed pipe is out on the bench. The next process is trimming, and for this a thinner wire is inserted up the stem. No matter how tightly the 2-part mould had been clamped together, the pipe always has a fin, that is, a ridge of clay forming a line along the stem and bowl. Various tools were used to remove this surplus clay, the last one, the head tool, giving the bowl a polished finish, the characteristic of a quality Broseley pipe. Clara wipes a sponge over the bowl, and then, in an instant, she uses the stamp attached to her belt to mark Southern's name on the stem of the pipe. The wire is taken out, and the trimming process begins again. In the 1920s, a trimmer received 6p, that is 2.5 in modern money, for trimming 186 or 15.5 dozen pipes. Eva Parry, who worked for the Southerns in 1921 when she was just 14 years old, remembers earning 7 shillings, that's 35p a week, which meant she must have trimmed over 2,500 pipes during that time. Now we see Harry Southern, the owner of the Pipeworks, preparing one of the churchwarden's saggers for firing. A sagger, made out of fire clay, protected the pipes from the smoke and cinders whilst they were fired in the bottle kiln. To give the churchwardens their characteristic curved stems, these particular saggers were humped back in shape. Powdered fired clay was used to prevent the pipes sticking together during the firing. Harry takes great care placing the long-stemmed pipes in the sagger, but probably conscious of the camera, one is inevitably broken. The firing process is not shown, and next we see Harry carrying a loaded sagger away from the kiln. We can clearly see that the pipes are set in the sagger in groups of 9 and 8 pipes wide by 3 pipes high. The firing would have taken approximately 2 days, with the churchwardens nearest to the top of the kiln. When the firing was almost over, a test pipe would have been removed and tapped against the kiln wall. If it made the right sound, the firing was complete, and the kiln would have been allowed to cool down before the pipes were removed. It appears that from this one sagger, almost 100 churchwarden pipes have been successfully fired. They're carried away to be packaged for sale. Inside the works, Harry takes a handful of pipes and dips the ends in an enamel. This was to prevent the pipes sticking to the smoker's mouth. After drying, the pipes are placed into cardboard boxes, which were also made in the factory. And the boxes are filled with chaff. And finally, Harry proudly shows off his grand coiled pipe again. Its manufacture still a trade secret to this day. Harry Southern continued to make pipes in these King Street works after the Second World War, but the market for them was very limited by then. The funds were not available for new equipment, so the traditional processes continued unchanged in buildings that had not altered for decades. Ivor Southern, Harry's son, still lives in Broseley and remembers his father's factory when it was working. The coal-fired bottle kiln built by Roland Smitherman in the 1880s was still used, and Ivor can remember helping with the firing.
The big pipes were put at the top of the kiln, and the small ones at down the bungs, down the bottom, because naturally there was our heat at the top. In that type of kiln, which was originally a bottle kiln, and then it was blocked off. So the heat would start at the bottom, go to the top, and then come back down, and then back out through the flues.
Keeping the coal burning during the firing sometimes called for drastic measures.
All of a sudden, you'd find that it wasn't drawing properly, which would be damp in the flues. So what you had to do then was to get a couple of gallons of paraffin and sling it down the flues, and then put a match to it and retreat quickly. And with a little bit of luck, that shifted the damp out, and you got a good draft.
In the last stages of firing, pipes were extracted from the kiln and subjected to an unusual test.
When the pipes were taken out of the kiln for testing to see whether they were hard enough, you take them out and let them cool for a period of time, and how you tell whether they were fired hard enough was by sound. So you had one pipe which was a test pipe from the kiln beforehand, or before that when it was fired, and then you went by sound on a quarry. So that's the hardest one there. Then that's the next one. And then to compare, that's the hardest one there. So that would have to be to that hardness.
In 1957, Ivor's father died, and although the business at the Pipeworks continued for a few more years, commercial production was never resumed. The kiln was not fired again, and all the tools and equipment for making pipes was simply abandoned. Fortunately, This proved to be an unconscious act of preservation, for it created a unique time capsule for a new generation to discover and appreciate. As you walk around the Pipeworks Museum, you are experiencing a working environment familiar to generations of Broseley men and women. Numerous local people earned their wages in this factory by producing a product that in turn earned their town a national and international reputation.